Hi guys, I'm sorry my uploading has been a bit erratic lately since December, and so has my commenting been and my replying. But normal service will resume shortly, I hope. So in order to ease myself back into a more regular schedule, I thought I'd do an easy book haul video today. I acquired a ton of books in December because I got some for free, but I also found a lot of good books used at a very small price. So I bought a lot of good books in December, so let's get right into it. As always, I'm going to show you the books that I've already read first. Now, I only have one such book here, but I've actually been quite good in that regard in December. Almost all of the books that I read in December I picked up within days of buying them, but they were almost all of them ebooks, and I don't usually show you ebooks in these haul videos because that would be a little sad. So I only have this one book, and that is A Dead Man in Deptford, which you might already have seen in my Best Books of the Year video. I finished this book on New Year's Eve, and it went straight up onto rank 3 of my Best Books of the Year. This is an account of the last couple of years and the death of Elizabethan playwright and poet Christopher Marlowe. I'm going to talk much more about it in my December wrap-up, so for now suffice it to say that it is one of the most intelligent and most cleverly written historical novels that I've ever read. And staying with the white, red and black color scheme, my next book is this one, Bloody Scotland. I heard about this on a crime novel podcast and put it on my wish list, and my friend Sarah bought it for me for Christmas. This book has such a lovely concept. Crime writers were invited to write short crime fiction centered around heritage sites all over Scotland. And we have some famous sites in here like Edinburgh Castle and Forth Bridge and the Neolithic tomb on Orkney, but also some more obscure ones like St. Peter's Seminary in Cardross, or the Hermit's Castle. That's where Val McDermid's story is set. So apparently the authors were given free rein when it comes to the selection of their heritage site, and that's why some more famous touristy sites are completely missing, like Ellendonan Castle or Orchard Castle. And I guess that makes the stories feel less artificial than they might have been otherwise, because obviously the authors were given the opportunity to write about those sites that tickled their fancy or imagination. And the book is also just so lovingly curated. There is a map here at the end where you can see where all the different sites are, like Edinburgh Castle and the tomb on Orkney. And also each site also gets one page with a description of its history, so that's very helpful too. So yeah, I'm thrilled to have gotten this book. And staying with the color scheme and with the Scotland and Tartan Noir theme, I've got Let It Bleed by Ian Rankin, which is the 7th book in the Inspector Rebus series. Ian Rankin, weirdly enough, does not feature in Bloody Scotland. Ian Rankin is often treated as the inventor of the Tartan Noir genre, though. I own the first book in the Inspector Rebus series, Knots and Crosses, which is set in Edinburgh. I think they're all set in Edinburgh. Yep, struggling through another Edinburgh winter we are in this one. I own the first book, but I haven't read it yet. I saw this at the little free library, so I got it for free, and of course I picked it up. I hope this series is good, and if it is, that I'll be able to get the other 5 books between the first one that I have and this one for free or at a very small price as well. So my friend gave me the Bloody Scotland book on our annual Christmas hike, and afterwards we went and had dinner at a cafe in my town which also sells used books. And after dinner I browsed the shelves and I found 3 good books, or at least I hope they are good. The first one was actually A Case of Mistaken Identity first. It's Jeanette Winterson's Sexing the Cherry, When I first saw this, I thought it was actually Emma Donoghue's Kissing the Witch, and I got excited, and then I realized my mistake. But I'm also always on the lookout for books, cheap books by Jeanette Winterson, so I got it anyway. I started to read this. This was the first book that I started this year, but I've already kind of put it away. So our narrator in this book is an orphan who, as a baby, got washed onto the shore of the Thames in London and was lucky enough to get adopted by a more or less doting mother. And this book, I'm not yet at the point, but apparently he goes on to have all kinds of adventures and travels around the world. But it is not a travelogue or an adventure story. It's a very slim book, and I think it's going to be quite experimental in its structure, and it's going to be about humanity. I'm only on page 16, but there are already elements that are like... And here we have our author writing a piece of very literary fiction. Isn't that great? And that has never impressed me much in the past, and already on page 16 I got a little tired of it. I think I'm going to push through it because it's only like 150 pages, under 150 pages, and then I can say that I've read some Jeanette Winterson. I'm just not sure it's going to be the greatest place to start with her, to be honest. The second book that I picked up at the cafe is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which has been on my to-read list for a while now, and I somewhat desperately want to read this book because I'm really interested in reading Michael Cunningham's The Hours, which is based on Mrs. Dalloway, and I feel like I have to have read this one first in order to be able to really enjoy and appreciate The Hours. I guess this needs very little introduction. It is about a day in the life of Mrs. Dalloway, who is throwing a fancy dinner party, and things are somewhat escalating the farther we get into the day. And the third and last book that I picked up at the cafe is Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin. This is a kind of soapy ensemble piece whose protagonist is a young woman from a small country town who travels to San Francisco for a short holiday or a work-related trip, and then decides to just stay there because she falls in love with the city and with all the colorful and quirky people that she meets there. I'm guessing this will be fun and light entertainment. I'm just hoping that all those colorful and quirky and also lovable characters won't turn out to be actually rather annoying. I think the danger of that is actually quite high. Anyhow, then I got some books by authors from my authors to read more of in 2020 list. I will link the video below. The first is John Henry Days by Colson Whitehead. This is apparently a commentary on and satire of the American dream. I'm just hoping that this book is going to work for me, even though I'm not intimately familiar with the folk myth of John Henry, and am therefore naturally also not in any way emotionally connected to it. I'm just hoping... I trust Colson Whitehead and that I'm in good hands with him. And two other books by an author that I want to read more of this year and that I discovered in 2019 are two middle grade books by Frances Hardinge. One is Fly by Night and the other one is The Lost Conspiracy. Fly by Night, turns out, is a book on stories and books and the power of books and the magic of books, which is something that I do not like. I know that's quite untypical for a booktuber, but I really don't like this trope and for this to be the theme and subject of a book. Let's hope it's good anyway, just because it's Frances Hardinge. The other book, The Lost Conspiracy, seems to be more traditional epic fantasy. It is about an island nation in which two young girls who have religious roles to play, a priestess and her maid or something like this, get entangled in political intrigue and I think even a possible invasion of the island. So this seems like much more traditional fantasy. It looks like a huge book, but as it is a children's book, the font is quite big and I think it will be easy and quick to get through. Even more traditional fantasy is this one, The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. This was published in 1924, and it is about a kingdom in which the people are thinking, maybe it's time to bring magic back to our country. And of course, the way you go about that is to send messengers to the King of Elfland across the border and ask for the king's daughter's hand in marriage for your own prince, thereby restoring magic to the royal bloodline. I'm very curious to read this one and see also how I get on with it stylistically. And then in the middle of December, the Department of German Studies at my university invited German science fiction author Dietmar Dath to come to the department and read from his 2 latest books. One is a science fiction novel. He writes mostly science fiction of the space opera kind. And the second book is a non-fiction book, a history of science fiction, actually. I had brought a book to that reading to get it signed afterwards, which is actually one of my favorite science fiction novels of all time, but it's called Pulsarnacht, but it hasn't been translated into English as far as I know. Anyhow, I had brought that book, but I had also tried to get his latest novel at the bookshop that afternoon to maybe have that signed as well, or to be able to start reading it afterwards, because I knew that I would want to after the reading, but I couldn't get the new book at the bookshop. And I told the author about it while he was signing my other book, and he just gave me a copy. Neptunation or Neptunation or Neptunation. It is about linguistics, among other things, I gather. So the premise of this book is that a spaceship vanished on a mission on its way through the solar system in the 1980s. So it's a bit alternate history here. And now in the present time, an expedition is sent out in order to either find the ship or at least reconstruct the events that led to its vanishing. But when Dietmar Dath was reading from his non-fiction book about the history of science fiction, it also got me into the mood to read some more classic SF. I usually stay away from those books because they are, for the most part, so damn full of problematic things. But of course, there are also some among them that have stood the test of time. So for a start, I bought The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. This is a dystopian novel about a post-World War II North America in a reality in which the Nazis won the Second World War and are now in power in North America. I have read Philip K. Dick before. I've read his most famous novel or novella, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And I was a bit disappointed by it. I don't think that the topic AI was explored to the emotional and philosophical depth that I would have expected from such a famous book and that was made into such great movies. But I'm willing to give him a second chance with this one because it's also so highly acclaimed by critics and fans alike. The second classic is a space opera, Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, translated from the Polish into the German by Irmtraud Zimmermann-Göllheim. In this book, a scientist is sent to a planet that is covered in a mighty ocean, which is in the curious habit of making manifest the memories and emotions of the people who approach it. And it is about finding out not only how it does that, but also why it does that. And the last SF classic that I bought is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, my first John Wyndham. I'll read you the blurb because it sounds too weird for me to explain it. When Bill Mason wakes up blindfolded in hospital, there is a bitter irony in his situation. Carefully removing his bandages, he realizes that he is the only person who can see. Everyone else, doctors and patients alike, have been blinded by a meteor shower. Now, with civilization in chaos, the Triffids, huge, venomous, large-rooted plants able to walk, feeding on human flesh, can have their day. Very much looking forward to making the acquaintance of John Wyndham. And then by contrast, I have two very contemporary cyberpunk novels. First one is Alif the Unseen by G. Willow Wilson. This is, I gather, set in an unnamed Middle Eastern-like security state in which a hacker and hacktivist unwittingly unleashes a djinn into a computer network, and what happens then. And then the next book, I think, requires no introduction. Ready Player One. One day at work, I found a 10-euro note in the hallway, and I wrote a note, but nobody came to claim it. So I thought that this is the best time to get this book out, about which I had been somewhat unsure for months, but now that I had this extra money, I just went and got it. And lastly, I've got two books that are kind of the odd ones out. One is Toibín's The Story of the Night. I have read Toibín before, or I've tried reading him. I tried to read The Blackwater Lightship, got about 50-60 pages in before I gave up, because it is a book with next to no plot, and for a book with no plot, it just wasn't written in an interesting enough way. It's nothing remarkable either stylistically or structure-wise, so it was just a whole lot of boredom. But then I recently watched Brooklyn, the movie, which is based on Brooklyn, the novel by Toibín, and I loved that one. I cried all the way through it, so I'm now willing to give Toibín a second chance. This one is set in Argentina at the end of the dictatorship, and it is about a gay man who is, of course, closeted at the beginning of the book, but apparently then, after some time, comes into his own. I'm not sure, I mean, I'd rather read a book about this by an Argentinian, to be honest. If you know one, please point it out to me. My next book is a German book, and it is one of my intentions to read more German books in 2020. And Außer Kontrolle by Volker Heise has been on my radar for some time now, and now I found a cheap used copy of it. This sounds a bit like an odd one. A man steps out of a restaurant in which he has been having dinner with a woman who is apparently the love of his life, but is unfortunately going to get married to another man. The protagonist has to go out and find a cash machine because the restaurant doesn't accept credit cards. This is not a stretch of the imagination. This actually happens a lot in Germany, and it's nothing to complain about, in my opinion. But anyway, he has to go out, find a cash machine, and apparently on the way to find a cash machine, things escalate very quickly. And I guess it's supposed to be a satire on our modern way of life or city life, because this is set in Berlin, by the way. So yeah, these are all the books that have come to live with me during the month of December. If you've read any of these, if you want to read any of these, if any of these have sparked your interest now, please do let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again very soon with my very late December wrap-up video. Bye!